book of Enoch reveals the truth about life on other planets and what lives on them. All right. I think that's what it said. And what, and what lives on each one. Okay. The book of Enoch reveals the truth about life on other planets and what lives on each one. Let's check it out.
A leather-bound manuscript sits behind iron doors in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, Ethiopia. Armed guards have protected it for over 1,000 years. Most people alive today have never heard its full contents. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. Church leaders declared it dangerous. They called it unfit for the faithful, and for 17 centuries it disappeared from Western Christianity entirely. When archaeologists uncovered the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 in the caves above Qumran, they found 11 separate copies of the Book of Enoch buried among them, more copies than most books that made it into the Bible we read today. That discovery forced scholars to confront a question they had been avoiding. If this text was so dangerous, what exactly does it say? Because the Book of Enoch does not only describe angels and watchers and the fall of heavenly beings, it describes other worlds. It describes what lives on them, and it names what those beings know. This script covers the specific passages, the scholars who translated them, the institutions that hold the fragments, and why the full text of what Enoch saw beyond our sky is still not taught in any mainstream church or seminary.
Yep.
If forbidden biblical history is something you keep returning to, hit subscribe. Every week we uncover what was pulled from Scripture. The fragments that describe other worlds are not buried deep in obscure corners of Enoch's writings. They sit right in the astronomical book, which is chapters 72 through 82, and in the parables section, which runs from chapter 37 through 71. The oldest physical copies of these passages are the Aramaic fragments held under designation 4Q209 and 4Q211, discovered in Cave 4 at Qumran and currently preserved at the Israel Antiquities Authority in Jerusalem. These are not medieval copies. They date to somewhere between 200 and 100 BCE, making them older than the entire New Testament. Scholar Joseph Milik, who spent decades working directly on the Qumran fragments at the École Biblique in Jerusalem, identified these specific sections as among the most technically detailed in all of ancient religious writing. Milik noted in his 1976 critical edition that the astronomical precision embedded in these chapters was not something a shepherd or a farmer could have invented. The numbers are too consistent. The geometry is too deliberate. Florentino Garcia Martinez, working from the same fragments at the University of Groningen, reached a similar conclusion. These chapters.
So basically, there's like a lot of math and all kinds of stuff in there, things that Enoch himself, being the person that he was and so long ago, shouldn't have been able to know all these things, or just lucky guesses, you know?
Chapters were not poetry. They were observation reports. The fragment designated 4Q211 contains column fragments describing the movement of celestial bodies in terms of fixed intervals and recurring cycles, the kind of language an engineer uses, not a poet. And the fragment does not read like someone guessing, it reads like someone recording. And here's what makes this different from everything else you have seen about the Book of Enoch. This is not speculation dressed as scholarship. This is not a reinterpretation of vague poetic imagery. This is what the text literally says, preserved in Aramaic older than the Gospels, cross-referenced across multiple independent manuscript traditions, the Ethiopian Ge'ez copies held in Aksum, the Greek Akhmim fragments preserved in Cairo, and the Dead Sea fragments in Jerusalem. 3 separate lineages, 3 separate languages, 3 separate centuries of scribes who never met each other. Same content. That level of agreement across independent traditions is not coincidence. Scholars who study manuscript traditions call it corroboration, the same word used in courtrooms when 3 witnesses questioned separately give the same account. The world described in these passages did not begin and end with our planet. Enoch saw more, and he wrote it down. The text begins with this. In chapter 40 of the parables, Enoch is lifted above the earth and positioned. The text uses a word that translates roughly as stationed at a point from which he can observe multiple heavens simultaneously. Scholar George Nicholsburg, professor emeritus at the University of Iowa and author of the landmark 2001 Hermeneia commentary on Enoch, translates.
Wow, look at that. Huh. I don't know if this is like an AI thing or if this is an actual photo in the book. The firmament. I see that. Huh. All right. You know, the book of Enoch apparently describes the earth as flat. I find that interesting.
This section as describing not one heaven, but a layered structure, each layer containing distinct forms of created life. Nicholsburg is careful with the word. He does not call these beings angels in the traditional sense. The Aramaic makes a distinction the English translations often blur between the holy ones who serve a throne and the inhabitants who exist within each sphere as its native population. These are residents, not messengers. That difference matters enormously. A messenger passes through, a resident belongs. Scholar Margaret Barker, a British theologian who has written extensively on pre-Christian Jewish temple traditions and their connection to Enoch, argues that this residential distinction was precisely what made the cosmological sections threatening. A theology built on one God and one creation cannot easily absorb a document that describes populated worlds elsewhere. Barker made that argument in her 1988 book, The Older Testament. She was not dismissed. She was simply not invited back into mainstream academic conferences on the subject.
She just wasn't invited back.
In chapter 60, the passages that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved in full, and that most Western translations quietly abbreviate, Enoch describes a specific world he calls the place of the luminaries. Scholar Ephraim Isaac, who produced the most widely used English translation of the Ethiopian Ge'ez text for the Old Testament pseudepigrapha in 1983, notes that the word used in Ge'ez for luminaries here is not the same word used elsewhere to describe stars or angels. It is a word that implies beings who carry light internally, not beings who reflect it. The distinction is physical. These are not metaphors for holiness. Enoch is describing biology. The beings of this place do not generate heat in the way fire generates heat. They generate something the text calls living radiance, and the ancient scribes who copied this passage across centuries apparently understood it clearly enough to preserve the technical word intact across three separate linguistic traditions.
Wow.
Torleif Elgvin, a Norwegian scholar who worked on Enoch fragments at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem through the 1990s, flagged this passage specifically in a 1997 paper. He noted that the biological framework implied by the Ge'ez vocabulary had no parallel anywhere else in ancient Jewish literature. His paper appeared in a specialist journal. It was not picked up by any mainstream theological publication. What modern readers don't realize is this. The third element of Enoch's cosmology of other worlds involves specific named regions, not vague spiritual planes. Chapter 77 describes what translator Michael Knibb, senior lecturer at King's College London, and the scholar who produced the critical Ge'ez edition for Oxford University Press in 1978, identifies as a geographical survey of the inhabited heavens. Enoch names 4 cardinal regions beyond Earth, each with distinct characteristics.
You know, I'm just sitting here thinking about it. I was like, you know, we are so blessed to be at the time right now to be living. Because, you know, it was these things were discovered like in the 40s. They were researched heavily, you know, and put together all in the 50s up through to the 70s, and doing these interpretations of deciphering these things. For us to be able to confidently say, yeah, it holds up to with what we already had from the Ethiopian Bible. It just confirms so much, man. And it's only now that we're able to do that. You know, people in the past, they didn't have what we have. We have more truth in front of us throughout all this deception that's going on surrounding us. It's just there if you look.
The northern region contains what the text calls the stone of cold, a substance or environment described in terms that scholars in the 20th century largely treated as metaphorical. The eastern region contains what translators render as the source of the waters above. The western region contains the place of the setting of the great luminaries, which is a specific technical designation, not a poetic one. And the southern region, the passage that James Bruce, the Scottish explorer who smuggled 3 copies of the Ethiopian Enoch to Europe in 1773, reportedly found most disturbing, describes a region of living wind, inhabited by beings who do not possess what the text calls the stillness of matter. Think of it the way a building inspector classifies structures. Enoch is not describing heaven in general terms. He is filing zone reports. Each region has a category, a physical property, and a class of inhabitant that matches the environment. A zoning document, written in the 3rd century before Christ, for a universe that science is only now beginning to map. And then comes the part that most translators handle very briefly. Chapter 43 describes Enoch being shown what the text calls the names of the lights, individual designations for specific luminaries, each paired with a function and a population. Scholar James Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame, one of the leading authorities on the Dead Sea Scrolls and Enoch literature, noted in his 2012 book, The Dead Sea Scrolls Today, that the naming conventions in this chapter follow a system. Each name encodes a role, an origin, and a governed domain. Vanderkam stopped short of claiming the domains were physical worlds, but he did say the system was too organized to be ornamental. Someone designed it. It was not decoration. Émile Puech, the French epigrapher at the École Biblique who worked alongside Milik on the Qumran collection, made a separate observation about this chapter. He noted that the Aramaic root structures used for the names of the lights do not appear in any other known ancient Jewish text. They are unique to Enoch. That means they were not borrowed from an existing tradition. They were created for this document alone. That is not what someone does when they are writing mythology. That is what someone does when they are recording a system they encountered and need to document accurately. You do not invent a private vocabulary for something you made up. You invent a private vocabulary because no existing word fits what you actually saw. Here is what makes this stranger still. In 2017, researchers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena published findings on atmospheric dynamics around gas giant exoplanets, planets orbiting stars beyond our solar system. Their data describe planetary environments where sustained, organized atmospheric circulation patterns could theoretically support complex organized structures without solid surfaces. The paper, authored by a team led by atmospheric scientist Nicole Lewis, did not reference Enoch. There is no reason it would have. But the environment it described, a world of organized, persistent, structured wind systems, matches the language Enoch used for his southern inhabited region, with a specificity that a writer in 300 BCE had no scientific framework to invent. In 2021, researchers at the Carl Sagan Institute at Cornell University published a separate study identifying chemical conditions in the upper atmosphere of Venus that could theoretically sustain microbial life, organisms that would never touch a solid surface, suspended permanently in cloud layers. Sarah Seeger of MIT, whose work on atmospheric biosignatures has shaped the way NASA now plans exoplanet observation missions, noted that such life would need to be fundamentally different from anything on Earth. It would carry no stillness of matter in any meaningful physical sense. The text of Enoch chapter 60 uses that exact phrase. That phrase has been sitting in the manuscript for over 2,000 years. If you ask someone in the year 300 BCE to invent a description of atmospheric life on a gas world, they would give you a dragon. What Enoch gave you reads more like a field classification, and this is where it gets disturbing. The suppression of these specific chapters has a documented history. The Council of Laodicea in 364 CE formally removed Enoch from the list of approved scripture. That is the foundational moment. But what followed was a targeted effort to discredit the cosmological section specifically. Jerome, who produced the Vulgate, the official Latin Bible, around 400 CE, dismissed Enoch in his preface to the book of Genesis. He called it the ravings of an antediluvian fantasist. Augustine, in City of God, wrote that Enoch's accounts of other inhabited regions could not be reconciled with proper theology and should not be taught. These were not casual dismissals. Jerome and Augustine were the two most influential biblical scholars of the early church. When they spoke, the entire Western tradition listened. And what they chose to suppress was not the parts about fallen angels. Those stayed in circulation through other texts. What they suppressed was the cosmological survey, the other worlds, the inhabitants, the zone reports. R.H. Charles, the Irish biblical scholar who produced the first major English critical translation of Enoch in 1906, acknowledged in his introduction that the
Wow, they've been translating this since 1906. They've been trying to work on this thing. Man, that's crazy.
Astronomical and cosmological sections were the most ancient core of the text. He called them pre-Maccabean in origin, meaning they predate even the oldest portions of the Qumran library. He did not suppress them, but he translated them with such heavy bracketing and qualification that most readers skipped them entirely. The effect was the same. Jerome's dismissal did the cultural work, Augustine's ruling did the institutional work. And the result, across 1,500 years of Western Christianity, was that no seminary, no church council, no theology faculty ever had to explain the cosmological survey. It simply did not exist. It had been argued out of existence by the two men most trusted to decide what God said and what God meant. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church refused. They kept the full text. They have read it continuously for over 1,500 years. Their version contains passages that do not exist.
I'm sorry, I keep saying wow. I'm just stunned by it, man. I don't know what else to say. I'm just like, it confirms it for me more and more every time we watch one of these videos. Just how much the Book of Enoch it fits, man. It really fits. And it just makes it makes other things within the Bible make so much more sense with it there.
Western translation, passages describing the specific behaviors, the specific environments, and the specific knowledge possessed by the beings Enoch encountered in each inhabited region. A documentary team from a European production company applied for access to the restricted manuscript archive in Aksum in 2019. The Ethiopian church authorities acknowledged the request. The permit was denied. The production company's correspondence, portions of which were shared in a 2021 academic conference presentation by scholar Loren Stuckenbrook of Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, indicated that the archive contains material not yet included in any published edition of the text. Stuckenbrook himself noted, in measured academic language, that the full scope of the Ethiopian preservation tradition had not been adequately explored by Western scholarship. He submitted a formal research inquiry. He received a reply stating that access would need to be coordinated through ecclesiastical channels. That coordination, as of the time of his 2021 remarks, had not been completed. The doors in Aksum did not open, they remained closed. There were researchers who got close through other channels. A scholar working with the Showing Collection in Oslo, one of the largest private manuscript collections in the world which holds Enoch fragments separate from the Qumran library, began publishing analysis of cosmological passages in 2018. The work was preliminary. A follow-up paper was announced. It has not appeared. The scholar's institutional page no longer lists Enoch among active research interests. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying the Book of Enoch is a literal travel guide to confirmed extraterrestrial civilizations. The text is ancient, the language is layered. Any translation involves choices. But what the text describes across 3 independent manuscript traditions, preserved by scribes who had no reason to coordinate their copies across 17 centuries and 3 languages, matches patterns in modern planetary science with a precision that should not be possible for a writer working in 300 BCE. The cosmological sections of Enoch are not vague. They are not dreamlike. They use the same matter-of-fact tone you would use to describe a bus route. Someone describing what they saw, not what they hoped or feared or imagined, what they saw. Scholar Loren Stuckenbrook has written that the cosmological material in Enoch is the section of the text that most resists symbolic interpretation, meaning that when scholars try to read it as metaphor, it does not cooperate.
It doesn't work.
The details are too specific. The categories are too precise. The vocabulary is too technical and too consistent to be allegory.
So basically, you're left with a decision to make, whether or not you can believe what the text says or not. You know, takes a leap of faith.
Specificity is the problem. You can dismiss a vision, you cannot easily dismiss a taxonomy. Visions are subjective. Zone reports with physical classifications and named populations are something else entirely. Enoch saw something. He wrote down what he saw, and the people who decided what counted as scripture decided those specific chapters did not belong. The fragments are still there. 4Q209 and 4Q201 sit in controlled storage in Jerusalem. The Ge'ez manuscripts remain in Aksum behind iron doors. The Greek Akhmim fragments, held in the collection of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo since their discovery in 1886, contain the cosmological passages in a third independent form. Scholar John Collins of Yale Divinity School, who has worked on Enoch materials for 4 decades, wrote in his 2016 volume on apocalyptic imagination that the cosmological sections of Enoch represent the most systematically ignored portion of ancient Jewish literature. He called the neglect striking. He did not call it accidental. The text Enoch wrote describes a universe that is not empty. It describes regions with residents. It names what those residents are made of and what they know. It catalogs 4 inhabited zones with the precision of a surveyor and the calm of someone who has been there. There are beings who carry light from within. There are beings built from living wind who have never known the weight of solid ground. There are the named luminaries of chapter 43, each assigned a domain in a vocabulary that has no counterpart anywhere else in ancient writing. It was preserved across centuries by people who took it seriously enough to guard it with their lives. It was buried by others who found its implications incompatible with a theology built on a single inhabited world. The zone reports are still on file. The inhabitants Enoch named are still named. And the iron doors of the church in Aksum, which have stood against 17 centuries of pressure to surrender what is inside, are still closed to the world tonight.
You know, I like a lot of the stuff that the information that this channel has been putting out, but after watching about 4 or 5 of them, I've come to the conclusion that they're mainly all just AI. It's like an AI slop video. It's all AI generated images, and I believe I'm really leaning towards now that the narrator is AI as well. See, this is one of those things. This is why I'm doing something different on this channel now for myself, to where I'm like every aspect of it, my face is attached to it. So that way you at least know, good, bad, or indifferent, this is real and it's not AI slop, at least. At least for the most part. Except for my DJ over here, which I enjoy having. Anyway.